The night was quiet on the world of Varnock, a wild moon covered in deep blue forests and glowing rivers. The air shimmered with mist, and the two silver moons hung low in the sky. It was the kind of silence that came before danger, heavy, waiting alive. In the heart of that forest, the predator pack moved. 6 hunters, strong and fast, their fur dark as smoke. Their eyes glowed yellow in the night. They moved without sound, like shadows that breathed. At the front walked Quran, the alpha. Quran was not like other predators. He was larger, older, and wiser. Scars across his chest, marks from old wars. His senses were sharp. He could smell every leaf, hear every heartbeat. And tonight he was angry. Something had taken his cubs. Hours ago, when the sun dipped behind the mountains, the cubs had been playing near the edge of the valley. The pack was hunting, and the young ones had followed too far. When Quran returned, their scent was gone. No trail of blood, no sign of struggle, only the smell of something strange. Human. The alpha's lips curled back, revealing sharp teeth. His growl rolled low through the forest, and the pack answered with a chorus of deep snarls. They all knew what humans were. Small, fragile things from the stars, but dangerous in other ways, with fire, metal, and tricks. They built machines that killed from a distance. They burned forests to make homes. And now, one of them had dared to touch his young. Quran would find the human, and when he did, the stars themselves would tremble. He raised his nose, sniffing the cold air. The scent was faint, but it was there, smoke, metal, and the soft trace of human sweat. The alpha moved faster. His pack followed, claws digging into the soft moss. They darted between tall trees, past glowing plants that bent away from their heat. Far above them, the moon slid behind clouds. The forest turned darker. A light flickered in the distance, a campfire. Quran stopped. The pack froze behind him. His ears twitched, listening. There was a heartbeat, steady, slow, human, alone. The alpha's eyes narrowed. He moved closer, each step silent, patient, deadly. He could see the small tent built beside a wrecked metal pod. Human technology. A crash site, old and broken. The light came from a weak flame in front of it, and then he smelled it. His cubs. The scent hit him like a blade. His eyes burned. His muscles tensed. They were close, too close. He moved around the camp, and what he saw made him stop. 2 small shapes lay curled beside the fire, wrapped in a shiny blanket. His cubs, safe, breathing, warm. And beside them, a human. It was a young woman, small and tired, her short brown hair sticking to her face. Her name was Mara, though Quran did not know that yet. She wore a torn pilot suit and boots caked with mud. Her hands were burned in places, and her clothes smelled of smoke and oil. She had built a small camp, nothing more than a tent and a broken heater. She was sleeping sitting up, her back against a rock, one arm resting protectively over the cubs. For a long moment, Quran didn't move. His pack waited behind him, growling softly, confused. Why were the cubs sleeping beside a human? Why were they not afraid? He took one slow step forward. The human stirred, opening her eyes. Her gaze met his. For a second, the whole forest seemed to hold its breath. Mara froze. Her heart thumped so hard she thought it might burst. The creature in front of her was huge, taller than any man, muscles rippling under thick fur, claws shining in the firelight. Its eyes glowed like molten gold. But it wasn't just its size that terrified her. It was the intelligence in its stare. It was thinking, deciding. Mara didn't move. She barely breathed. The cubs, sensing the presence of their alpha, whined softly and snuggled closer to her. The alpha's eyes flicked down at them. The growl in his throat faded. Confusion replaced fury. This human, This fragile, strange creature had not hurt them. She had kept them warm, protected them. Behind him, one of the pack members, smaller and younger, stepped forward with a snarl. Quran lifted his paw, signaling silence. His gaze stayed on the human. He could smell no fierce sweat from her, only calm and exhaustion. She looked weak, but her eyes were steady. He didn't know why, but something in that moment felt different. For the first time in his life, the Alpha hesitated before striking. The wind whispered through the trees. Sparks from a fire rose into the night air, drifting between predator and human. Two worlds met in that silence, one built for survival, one built for mercy. Quran slowly stepped closer, lowering his head. His breath brushed against the edge of her blanket. Mara's hand shook, but she did not run. The cubs shifted again, letting out soft purrs of contentment. The Alpha blinked. This was no thief, no enemy. This human had done something no creature in his world would ever believe. She had cared. And in that quiet moment, as the fire crackled and the moons reappeared through the clouds, the great predator lowered his head just a little, not in defeat, but in respect. The hunt was over. Something far more unbelievable had just begun. The forest had a heartbeat of its own. It whispered through the tall blue trees and glowed softly with rivers of light. The air carried a strange hum, the song of a living world untouched by machines. But that night, the forest was restless. It was waiting for something. Far from the hunting grounds of the predator pack, a small human camp flickered beneath the trees. Smoke drifted lazily from a weak fire, and sparks rose like tiny stars. A young woman sat beside it, hands shaking as she tried to fix a broken metal heater. Her name was Mara Ivans, an engineer from the exploration ship Resolute. Mara had crashed here 2 nights ago. Her escape pod had fallen from orbit after a meteor strike hit her ship. The others never made it out. She was alone, the only human for hundreds of miles on a world full of teeth and claws. Her food was running low. Her comms were dead. The air was cold enough to bite through her bones. But she refused to give up. Humans didn't give up, not when there was still one more breath left to fight for. She sat by her small fire, whispering to herself, "Fix the heater, fix the signal, get out of here." It was all she could do to stay focused. That was when she heard it, a sound too soft to be the wind, a small whimper. Then another. Mara froze, listening. It came again, from behind the broken pod. Something was moving. Her first thought was fear. On this world, even the smallest creature could kill. She reached for the small laser cutter she used for repairs. Not a weapon, but better than nothing. She stepped slowly around the wreck, her boots crunching on the frost-covered grass. Then she saw them. 2 small shapes curled together under the shadow of the pod. They looked like wolf cubs at first, furry, small, and trembling. But as she got closer, she saw the truth. Their eyes were strange, a soft gold that glowed in the dark. Their ears were longer, their claws sharper. They were alien, but also helpless. Her breath caught in her throat. The cubs made a weak sound, a mix between a growl and a cry. They were shaking violently. One of them lifted its head and gave a soft, broken whine. "Oh, no, you're freezing," Mara whispered. She didn't think. She acted. Instinct. The same instinct that had helped her survive, told her what to do. She dropped to her knees, unzipped her jacket, and pulled out the heat blanket she had saved from the crash. Carefully, she wrapped it around the cubs. They stiffened at first, but when the warmth spread, they stopped shaking. One let out a small purr. The other buried its head against her arm. Mara smiled, though her eyes were wet. "It's okay, you're safe now. I've got you." The firelight flickered against their fur, turning it silver blue. They were beautiful in a strange way, wild and perfect. She had no idea what species they were or who they belonged to, but something deep inside her heart told her she couldn't leave them. Maybe it was loneliness. Maybe it was hope. Maybe it was just human nature. She built a small bed of cloth and wires near a fire and placed the cubs there. She fed them tiny bits of food paste from her rations, and to her surprise, they ate. When she leaned close, one of them sniffed her fingers and licked them. It made her laugh for the first time since the crash. "You, too, are trouble," she whispered. "Big trouble." As the night deepened, the forest around her grew darker. Strange eyes glowed in the distance, watching the human who sat with two alien young by the fire. The air carried the faint scent of predators, the true owners of this forest. But Mara didn't notice. She was humming softly, trying to calm the cubs. Her voice was quiet, broken, but gentle. It filled the silence like a small light in a world of shadow. Above her, the moons drifted apart, casting pale light over clearing. The cubs slept soundly, their small chests rising and falling against her arm. Mara leaned back against the rock and stared into the flames. For the first time since she crashed, she didn't feel completely alone. She didn't know that far away. Something else had noticed the same scent, their scent, and was moving closer every minute. The predator pack had found the trail. Karan, the alpha, lifted his head and tasted the air. His cubs, alive, but mixed with something else, the scent of metal and smoke. The human scent. He roared into the night, a sound that rolled through the forest like thunder. The pack followed, paws pounding the ground. Trees shook. Birds fled. The hunt had begun. Back at the camp, the fire crackled. Mara's eyes snapped open. She thought she had heard something far away, like distant thunder. But when she listened again, there was only silence. She looked at the sleeping cubs, smiled faintly, and whispered, "You're safe here." The forest disagreed. In the darkness, 6 golden eyes moved closer through the mist. The alpha's fury burned hotter than any flame. By the time dawn touched the treetops, the line between predator and protector would blur forever, and the story that would shake 2 worlds was about to begin. The night was no longer calm. Something heavy moved through the forest, shaking the ground with each step. The glowing mist around the trees swirled and scattered as shadows passed through it. Birds fled from their nests. Small creatures hid beneath roots. The forest itself seemed to bow in silence. The predator pack was coming. At the front, the alpha, Karan, moved with purpose. His muscles rippled beneath dark fur, and his golden eyes burned with rage. Every breath he took carried the scent of his missing cubs, faint but growing stronger, and mixed with it was the stinging smell of something unnatural. Human. To Karan, humans were ghosts of fire. They came from the sky with metal and light. They built, they destroyed, and then they left. But this human, had his children. The pack followed close behind, 6 strong hunters, silent and sharp. Their claws sank into the soft ground. Their ears flicked at every sound. They trusted their alpha completely. Karan stopped at the edge of a ridge. From there, he could see a faint glow through the trees, a weak orange light, fire, and around it, movement. He narrowed his eyes. He could see shapes, 2 small, familiar ones curled together, his cubs, and beside them, a figure, human. A deep growl rumbled in his chest. His pack tensed, ready to attack. But Karan raised his paw. He wanted to see. He wanted to understand what this creature had done. Down below, Mara sat near her fire, half asleep, her head leaning against a rock. The cubs were pressed close against her side, wrapped in the silver heat blanket. One of them twitched in a dream. The other purred softly. The heater had died again, but the fire kept them warm. Mara smiled faintly in her sleep. She was exhausted, but her heart was peaceful. Then the forest went quiet. completely quiet. The wind stopped. Even the insects fell silent. Her eyes snapped open. Something was wrong. She looked around, blinking. The light of the fire didn't reach far. Beyond the glow, the forest was only darkness. Then she saw it, a pair of glowing eyes. Then another, and another. 6 pairs, circling her. Her breath caught in her throat. Her mind screamed one word, run, but her body wouldn't move. One shape stepped forward, larger than the rest. It moved with slow, deadly grace. When it came close enough, the firelight touched its face. The alpha. Quran's teeth glimmered in the orange glow. His eyes locked on hers, intelligent, cold, and burning. Mara didn't reach for her cutter. She knew it was useless. Instead, she sat still, her body frozen between fear and disbelief. The cubs stirred beside her, sensing the presence of their kin. They blinked sleepily, then made a small sound, a happy, innocent chirp. Quran froze. The sound hit him harder than any weapon. His cubs, alive, unharmed, and rested beside this human. His growl faded into silence. The pack waited for a signal. One wrong sound, one order, and the human would die before she could scream. But Quran did not speak. He just watched. Mara's eyes darted to the cubs. They had crawled closer to her, pressing against her warmth. She could see the alpha's confusion. For a brief moment, she thought she saw something in his eyes. Not hatred, but hesitation. Slowly, carefully, she lifted her hands, palms open. Her voice trembled. "I didn't hurt them," she whispered. "They were cold. I just wanted to help." Of course, he couldn't understand her words, but he understood her tone, her scent, her heartbeat. She was afraid, yes, but not the kind of fear that came before an attack. It was the kind of fear that came from caring too much. The cubs yawned and stumbled toward Quran. They rubbed against his leg, whining softly. The alpha bent down, sniffing them. Their scent was pure, safe. He looked back at the human. She had protected them. Behind him, one of the hunters growled low. Quran snapped his head around, baring his fangs. The growl stopped. The pack fell silent. The alpha turned back toward Mara. He stepped closer, his breath hot against her face. She flinched but didn't run. For a long moment, they simply stared at each other. Two beings from different worlds, bound by something neither could explain. The fire cracked softly. Sparks floated into the air. Quran lowered his head, close enough that she could see the scars across his muzzle. He could end her life in one strike. But he didn't. He leaned down, sniffed the blanket, then the cubs, then her. Mara's heart hammered. She whispered again, "It's okay, you're safe." He didn't understand the words, but he felt their weight. He stood tall again, eyes locked on hers. The forest seemed to breathe once more. A strange calm settled between them. The pack began to back away slowly, still watching, still unsure. Quran stayed for a moment longer. Then, with one last look at the human, he turned and disappeared into the trees. Mara didn't move until the last shadow was gone. Her body was shaking. Her hands trembled, but her eyes were wide with wonder. She turned to the cubs. They were still asleep, peaceful as before. What just happened, she whispered to herself, wasn't possible. Far in the forest, Quran looked back toward the camp, his golden eyes glinting under the moons. His rage had cooled into something else, confusion and curiosity. The human had not harmed his young. She had guarded them, protected them. For the first time in his long life, the alpha's hunt had ended not in death, but in silence. And deep inside him, something began to change. Dawn had not yet broken over Varnock, but the first pale light of the moons touched the forest floor. The mist glowed silver as it drifted through the trees. The air was cold, sharp enough to sting the lungs. Every sound seemed louder in the stillness. The crackle of dying fire, the slow breath of the sleeping cubs, and the faint heartbeat of a human who had not closed her eyes all night. Mara sat by the embers, staring into the fading flame. Her hands trembled slightly as she rubbed warmth into them. The events of the night still spun in her mind like a dream she couldn't believe was real. She had seen them, not just any creatures, but the true rulers of this planet, the predator pack, and their leader, the Alpha. That face, those eyes. It wasn't just an animal's gaze. There was thought there, something almost human. He could have killed her. He should have. But he hadn't, and that scared her more than anything else. The cubs stirred beside her, stretching, yawning, curling closer into her lap. They had no fear, no understanding of what had happened. For them, the world was still simple, warm, soft, and safe. Mara smiled weakly and whispered, "You two are lucky. Your dad's terrifying." She tried to laugh, but it came out quiet and shaky. Her thoughts drifted back to the Alpha, his size, his strength, the way he had looked at her. It was like being judged by nature itself. Yet in those golden eyes, she had seen a question, not hatred, a question she couldn't answer. Out in the distance, the forest shifted again. Something large was moving. Her heart jumped. She reached for the small metal cutter by her side, her only defense. But then, a familiar sound reached her ears. A low, rumbling growl, not full of anger this time. Slower, controlled. He had come back. Through the mist, the Alpha appeared once more, moving with calm, deliberate steps. His fur shimmered in the moonlight, marked by scars and dirt. Behind him, two of the pack members waited, watching silently. Mara didn't move. She was frozen between fear and awe. The cubs saw him and let out small cries of joy. They tumbled toward him on wobbly legs, tails flicking. Karan, though Mara didn't know his name, lowered his head to meet them. He sniffed each one, nudging them gently with his muzzle. A deep, rumbling sound came from his chest, almost like a sigh. Relief. Then his gaze rose again to her. The forest held its breath. Mara sat still, her hands open and trembling. "You see," she whispered softly, though she knew he couldn't understand. "They're okay." Karan took one slow step forward, his claws pressed into the dirt, his breath forming small clouds in the cold air. His packmates shifted behind him, confused and restless. This was not what they expected. The Alpha should have attacked, reclaimed the cubs, and left nothing behind. But he didn't. Something in the human scent told him this moment was different. It carried no blood, no fear. It smelled of care, warmth, and exhaustion. He looked down at the cubs again. They pressed against her leg, unafraid. That simple act cut deeper than any weapon. His own children trusted this fragile, alien being more than their own kind. Why? The Alpha tilted his head, studying her. His breath was deep and steady, his eyes sharp. He could feel her pulse, quick but not frantic. Her heart was strong. Mara met his gaze and did something no one would have dared. She reached down, lifted the blanket, and showed him what she had done. The heater beneath the fabric, still faintly warm, its small light flickering. Her voice was quiet. "I just wanted to keep them alive." He didn't understand her words, but he understood her tone. The rhythm of it was gentle, not threatening. Karan lowered his head, his nose inches from her hand. The scent of fire, metal, and human skin filled his senses. It was strange, alien, yet not unpleasant. Behind him, one of his hunters snarled, ready to leap. The Alpha turned sharply and growled. The sound was deep and final. The younger one dropped to the ground instantly, head lowered. Mara flinched at the sound but didn't run. She stayed still, her breath shaking. Karan looked back at her again. The fear in her eyes was real, but so was something else. Courage! She was terrified, but she didn't back away. That was the moment everything changed. The Alpha stepped forward until his shadow covered her. She could feel the weight of his presence, the power in every muscle, the heat from his breath. Her body screamed to move, but her heart whispered to stay. And so she stayed. The cubs crawled back toward him, rubbing their small heads against both the Alpha and the human, as if they belonged to them both. Karan looked at her once more. Then, in a slow, deliberate motion, he lowered his head until his snout touched the ground, just for a second. It wasn't submission. It wasn't threat. It was something else entirely. Recognition. A silent promise. Mara's eyes filled with tears. She whispered, "You understand?" Karan stood tall again, gave a final low growl, soft this time, and turned away. His pack followed him, fading into the silver mist. The human sat there for a long time after they were gone, her heart racing, her mind trying to make sense of what had just happened. For the first time since she crashed on Varnock, she didn't feel like an intruder. She felt seen. And deep in the forest, the Alpha paused once more, glancing back toward the faint glow of her fire. The human's kindness had reached across instincts older than time itself. The hunt was over. The judgment was complete, and a fragile peace had begun. The sun rose slowly over the horizon, spilling golden light across the misty forest of Varnock. The glowing rivers shimmered like veins of light through the earth. The wind carried the scent of wet moss, fire ash, and something deeper, the scent of a fragile peace. Mara Ivan sat near the ashes of her dying fire. The cubs were still asleep, curled against the warmth of her coat. She hadn't slept at all. Her mind kept replaying the night, the Alpha's eyes, the silent bow, the way his breath had brushed her face. It didn't feel real, and yet it was. She stared into the trees where he had vanished, half expecting those golden eyes to appear again. Part of her wanted them to, not out of fear, but out of something else. Something she didn't have words for. She whispered to herself, "He understood me." The cubs stirred at the sound of her voice, blinking up at her with sleepy eyes. They were growing more confident, more playful. One tried to climb onto her lap. The other rolled onto its back, paws in the air. Mara smiled softly. "You two need names," she said. "Let's see you." She pointed to the smaller one. "You're Spark." "And you," she ruffled the other's ear, "you're Echo. You make enough noise for both of you." The cubs tilted their heads, as if listening. Spark sneezed, making her laugh for the first time that morning. But behind her laughter, a deep ache lingered. She knew they didn't belong to her. Somewhere out there, a family waited, powerful creatures that could crush her with a swipe, yet had shown mercy. Mara stood, stretching stiff legs, and began to pack what little she had. Her plan was simple: survive, repair the signal device, call for rescue. But as she glanced at the cubs again, she hesitated. If she left this place, what would happen to them? A low breeze brushed through the trees. The forest seemed to listen to her thoughts. She sighed and shook her head. "No, I can't leave you here alone." As if on cue, Spark growled playfully, tugging at her bootstring. That's when the air changed. The cubs froze. Their ears perked up, bodies stiffening. Mara felt it too. The air grew heavier, charged. Something large was moving again. Her pulse quickened. She turned toward the trees, and there he was, the Alpha. Karan stepped out of the mist like a shadow come alive. His eyes locked on hers instantly. Behind him, the rest of the pack waited, their bodies low, ready but calm. Mara's breath caught. She didn't move. She didn't run. Spark and Echo chirped and stumbled forward, rushing toward their father. They nuzzled against his legs, tails flicking. The alpha bent down, touching each one gently with his snout. Then his gaze rose to meet hers. Mara slowly knelt to the ground, lowering herself to seem smaller, less threatening. Her heart pounded in her chest. She didn't know why he was here, to take them, to judge her again, or to end what he started. The alpha's golden eyes flickered. He took one slow step forward. His breath steamed in the cold air. He looked at the cubs, then back at her, his head tilting slightly, questioning. She understood that look. It wasn't rage. It was curiosity. She pointed gently to the cubs and spoke softly. "They're safe. I kept them warm." He didn't understand the words, but he seemed to understand the tone. His nostrils flared as he sniffed the air. Their scent, the faint smell of smoke and warmth. Then, in a slow, graceful motion, he sat. Mara blinked. For the first time, he wasn't towering over her. He was still massive, but his body language was calm, almost patient. The pack behind him watched closely, but none moved. Mara took a shaky breath. "You're not going to hurt me, are you?" she whispered. The alpha tilted his head again. His ears flicked toward her voice. He made a low sound, not quite a growl, not quite a purr. It almost sounded like an answer. She smiled nervously. "Okay," she said softly. "Then we understand each other." Slowly, she reached for a small bowl beside her pack, a metal dish she had used for melting snow. She filled it with water from her flask and pushed it across the dirt toward him. The alpha's eyes followed it. The bowl stopped just before his claws. He sniffed it, then looked back at her. A pause. Then, to her astonishment, he lowered his head and drank. Mara's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled, but she didn't move. She watched him carefully, afraid to break the moment. When he finished, he made a low rumble again, not threatening, but deep and calm. The cubs purred beside him, pressing against his leg. Mara didn't know what it meant, but she felt it, a message without words. Respect. She smiled faintly and whispered, "You're welcome." Karan rose, towering again. He looked at her one last time, his gaze lingering, thoughtful, almost gentle. Then he turned and called softly to the pack. They moved back into the forest, silent and swift. The alpha followed, but before disappearing into the mist, he stopped. He looked back once more. Their eyes met. No growl, no sound, just a shared understanding. A bridge between two species built not with language, but with compassion. When he was gone, Mara exhaled, her body finally relaxing. She looked down at the empty bowl and laughed quietly. "No words," she whispered, "but somehow we spoke." She looked at Spark and Echo, still watching the trees where their father had vanished. The forest was alive again, but no longer felt dangerous. For the first time since she had crashed, it felt like home. And deep within that living world, both human and predator had taken a first step towards something far greater: trust. The forest of Varnock slept under a blanket of mist. Silver light from the twin moons spilled over the trees, painting the world in shades of blue and quiet gold. The air carried a strange calm, a peace too fragile to last. Mara Ivan sat by her small fire, sharpening a metal rod she had shaped into a makeshift spear. Her hands were steady now. Fear had changed into something else. Purpose. She had survived crashes, cold, hunger, and the predators of this world. But now, she faced something she didn't understand. Trust. The cubs, Spark and Echo, played near the fire, tumbling and wrestling, their tiny growls filling the air. They were growing stronger, and with every day, they felt more like family. Mara smiled as Echo tripped over his own paw and squeaked in frustration. "You'll get it one day," she said, laughing softly. But the laughter faded as quickly as it came. She looked out into the trees, her expression tightening. The forest had gone silent again. Her hand froze mid-motion. She whispered, "Not again." Then she saw them. Shapes, large, dark, and familiar, moving through the mist. The glow of golden eyes. The predator pack had returned. Her heart pounded. She grabbed the cubs and pulled them close. The firelight flickered over their small bodies as she whispered, "Stay behind me." The pack stepped into view, spreading out in a wide circle around the camp. Their breath steamed in the cold air. The smell of earth and fur filled the clearing. And then, through the mist, came him, the Alpha, Quran. His presence silenced everything. Even the wind seemed to stop moving. His golden eyes burned brighter than the firelight as he stepped forward, each movement slow and deliberate. Mara rose to her feet, the spear still in her hand, though she knew it meant nothing. Her chest rose and fell quickly, but she did not back away. The cubs cried softly, torn between fear and joy. They wanted to run to their father, but they could feel the tension between their two worlds. Quran stopped only a few steps away. The other predators lowered their heads, watching their alpha for a signal. For a long moment, no one moved. The air was thick with silence. Then Quran looked down. His cubs peered up at him from behind the human's legs, eyes bright and innocent. They had grown, stronger, cleaner, fed, alive. He looked back up at Mara. His nostrils flared as he breathed her scent. Smoke, oil, metal, fear, and beneath it, warmth. The same warmth that clung to his cubs. He understood now. She had saved them. The human raised her hands slowly, palms open. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "I didn't mean to take them. I just couldn't leave them to die." He didn't know her words, but her tone reached him. Every sound carried emotion, and emotion was something even predators could read. Quran's gaze softened. He stepped closer, closing the distance between them, until his shadow fell over her completely. The pack tensed. One wrong move, and they would strike. Mara swallowed hard. She whispered, "It's okay. I'm not your enemy." The cubs, sensing their father's calm, slipped from behind her and ran forward. Spark nuzzled Quran's leg. An echo pressed his small head against Mara's boot. They stood together, human, alpha, cubs, a sight that should have been impossible. The pack growled, uneasy. This was not their way. No predator bowed to prey. No alpha allowed weakness. But then, something happened. Quran's breathing slowed. He lowered his head, not in threat, not in anger, but in something deeper, something older, respect. The world seemed to stop. Mara froze, eyes wide. She didn't understand at first. The great creature, the ruler of this wild world, was lowering his head before her, slowly, carefully, until his muzzle brushed the dirt at her feet. She could see the scars on his face, the lines of strength and age. And yet he bowed. The pack watched in disbelief. Their leader, the unchallenged alpha, showing reverence to a human. Mara's eyes filled with tears. Her throat tightened. She knelt, slowly, and reached out with trembling hands. Her fingers brushed his fur, thick, coarse, warm. The alpha didn't flinch. He stayed there, breathing steady, his golden eyes half closed. No words, no sound, just understanding. Behind him, the other predators began to shift uncertainly. One by one, they lowered their heads too, not as deeply, but enough to show what they felt. Acknowledgement. Mara covered her mouth with a shaking hand. You understand me," she whispered. The alpha raised his head again. For a moment, their eyes met, human blue against alien gold. Two species, separated by stars, sharing something neither could explain. He turned his gaze to the cubs, then back to her, and gave a soft growl, low and steady. It was not anger. It was a promise. Then, with a last look at the fire and the human beside it, Koran turned and walked away into the mist. The pack followed him, silent, fading into the silver forest. Mara stood there long after they were gone. The fire crackled softly. The cubs pressed against her legs, watching the direction their father had gone. Her mind couldn't find words for what had just happened. A creature born for war and blood had bowed to her, a human, weak and lost, not because of power, but because of compassion. She sank to her knees and whispered, "Maybe that's what makes us human. We care, even when it's dangerous." The wind moved again, carrying her words into the forest. And somewhere beyond the trees, the alpha paused and looked back. He couldn't understand her language, but he felt her meaning in the air. That night, both predator and human learned something new. Strength wasn't always in the claws or the teeth. Sometimes it lived in the heart. The dawn broke quiet over the forests of Varnock. The mist drifted like smoke between the tall silver trees, and the rivers below gleamed with light. The world felt still, peaceful in a way that only comes after something great has changed. At the edge of that glowing valley, Mara Ivan sat by her fire, holding the two cubs close. Their fur shimmered in the soft morning light, their small breaths steady against her chest. She was smiling, but her eyes were distant, watching the horizon where the alpha had disappeared. She hadn't moved since he left. Part of her still didn't believe it. A predator, an apex hunter, had bowed to her. No one back home would ever believe it. No report, no camera, no recording could capture what she had seen. The bow wasn't just respect. It was understanding, the kind that bridges entire worlds. Mara whispered softly, "You did it, Koran. You showed me that monsters aren't always monsters." The cubs made a small noise, half growl, half purr, and curled tighter into her arms. She laughed quietly, shaking her head. "And you too, you're the reason this happened." But even as she spoke, she knew what she had to do. They didn't belong to her. They never did. Her communicator, cracked and silent, still sat beside the wreck of her escape pod. It hadn't sent a signal since the crash. The thought of rescue felt distant now, a dream from another life. Still, she was human, and humans never stopped trying. She spent the day repairing what she could, using scraps of wire, melted metal, and fragments of the ship's transmitter. Her fingers were cut and burned, but she kept working. The cubs watched curiously, pawing at tools and chasing sparks. By evening, the device hummed faintly to life. A soft green light blinked once, weak but alive. Mara smiled, wiping sweat from her forehead. "There you go," she said softly. "Now someone might hear us." But as she spoke, a deep growl echoed in the distance. The cubs froze. Their ears twitched. Mara turned, heart pounding, scanning the shadows. The forest had gone quiet again. Then movement. Figures emerged from the mist, tall and familiar. The predator pack. At the front was Koran. Her chest tightened. She stood slowly, her hands open. "It's okay," she said softly. "They're safe." Koran approached, silent and steady. The pack stayed behind him, low and alert. His golden eyes locked on the cubs, Spark and Echo, who bounded toward him with excited cries. He lowered his massive head, touching each one gently with his muzzle. A deep rumble rolled from his chest. Not a growl, but something warmer. Then his gaze rose to meet hers. They stood like that for a long time, predator and human, surrounded by glowing mist and soft light. Mara spoke quietly, her voice shaking. "They're yours. I just kept them alive." Koran tilted his head, studying her face. He didn't understand her words, but he could read her heart. The bond was there, invisible but real. She knelt, letting the cubs go. Spark hesitated, looking between them, then ran to his father. Echo followed, tumbling clumsily over a root. Mara laughed through tears. "Go on," she whispered. "He's waiting." Kuran watched as she stepped back. The cub circled his legs, tails wagging. He could smell her scent on them still. Fire, warmth, care. The scent of safety. The alpha turned his gaze to her one last time. Then, in a gesture that made the forest itself seem to still, he lowered his head again. Not as deeply as before this time. It was not a bow of respect, but a farewell. Mara smiled faintly. "Goodbye, Kuran." The pack turned and melted into the forest, silent and sure. Within moments, they were gone. Only the sound of rustling leaves remained. She stood alone by her fire, staring at the empty space they had left behind. The forest felt quieter, emptier, but not lonely. She knew she had been part of something bigger than herself, something ancient and pure. Night fell again. The stars came out, brighter than ever. She sat beside her beacon, the soft green light blinking in the dark. When the rescue ship finally came 3 days later, its engines roared to the sky like thunder. The landing lights lit the valley. Soldiers and medics ran to her, shouting in disbelief when they found her alive. They asked what happened. They asked how she survived on a planet full of apex predators. Mara only smiled. "I had help," she said. "They didn't understand. They never would." But when the ship lifted off, carrying her away from Varnock, she looked out the window one last time. Far below, at the edge of the glowing forest, she saw movement. A dark shape stood among the trees, massive, unmoving, golden eyes staring up at the ship. Kuran. He didn't roar. He didn't move. He simply watched, silent and proud, until the ship disappeared into the clouds. And somewhere deep in the heart of that forest, the story began to spread. Among the predator pack, a legend was born. The tale of the human who protected the young, who faced the alpha and lived, who earned the bow of a king. They called her the human protector. And among the stars, others began to whisper too. Soldiers, traders, and wanderers told her story of a human who taught predators mercy. Some called it impossible. Some called it a lie. But those who truly listened felt something else. Hope. Because somewhere on a wild moon far from Earth, a single act of kindness had changed the order of the universe. And every time the twin moons rose over Varnock, the pack still howled, not for the hunt, but for the human who cared.